Hello and welcome to our podcast through the University of Kansas Medical Center. My name is Angela Carrasco, and joining us today we have Dr. Lauren Mann, Clinical Assistant Professor in the Department of Hearing and Speech at the University of Kansas Medical Center. Dr. Mann also directs the audiology clinic at KUMC and is a PhD in audiology candidate. Thank you for joining us today, Lauren.
Thanks for having me.
In reading your bio, I see you have experience in tinnitus evaluation and treatment. What is tinnitus and what causes it?
Well, I'll start by explaining tinnitus or tinnitus is an okay pronunciation of that word. That's the number one question I get in the clinic. I always explain to patients that tinnitus, the root words are tinnier, which means to ring, and itis means inflammation. So it's essentially extra ringing that shouldn't be there. But I think that here we use tinnitus because it doesn't lead people to believe that it's an inflammatory process going on in the ear, which it often isn't. So basically, long answer for a short question, it's ringing in the ears, and a lot of people have it. Really, it could be from noise exposure, from medication use, head injuries. There's a lot of reasons that people will develop it.
So how can someone identify if they have tinnitus?
Right now, there is no objective test to tell if you have tinnitus or not. It's just based on patient report. So if you ever hear ringing or buzzing or chirping, cicada sounds, that's tinnitus. That's what we're talking about.
Is it something that stays constant or does it come and go?
It depends on the patient. There are some causes of tinnitus that are related to muscular or vascular spasm, and those can be temporary. You've probably all experienced that. Mm-hmm. A vascular spasm or a muscular spasm, we call those somatosounds, and that's tinnitus where your hearing feels like it gets muffled for a second, you hear a high-pitched squeal, and then things really go back to normal pretty quick. Mm-hmm. The kind of tinnitus that I see and treat in the clinic is more chronic, always there for a patient, and usually more related to noise exposure.
So I know if I've gone to a really loud concert and maybe didn't have my hearing protection in like I should have or something, I might have the ringing in my ears. That's just a temporary thing. So is that still considered tinnitus even though it might go away? It would go away probably in that case.
I'm glad you bring that up because most people hear tinnitus briefly after they've been at a loud concert or a KU basketball game, for example.
Right.
But they don't think about the ears are warning you that that sound was too loud. That's why you're having the symptom. So even though it goes away, you're still hurting your ears by being in that experience over and over. Mm-hmm. So I'm always adamant that patients wear earplugs if they're going to be somewhere loud.
Right, right. If you have tinnitus, does that mean you always have hearing loss or you experienced hearing loss?
That's a great question. So not everybody with the hearing loss experiences tinnitus, but everybody with tinnitus has some kind of hearing damage. Often it's not at a level that we can detect with the testing we have available, but I would venture to guess that all of it starts with some type of damage in the auditory system.
Okay. So if an individual believes that they have tinnitus, how severe does it need to be before they seek help from an audiologist?
I encourage anyone that hears ringing more than just that brief occasional spasm type ringing I mentioned, but if you're hearing it for more than a few days at a time, or more than a few hours in a day, you should really be evaluated because there are multiple causes and sometimes we can effectively reduce or remove your ability to hear that sound. So It's worth checking out regardless.
So I know that there seems to be a preconception that tinnitus cannot be treated, but you just made it sound like there is treatment for this. So how do you treat it and can it ever go away?
I'm always careful to tell patients there is no cure. There's no pill, no shot. You cannot eat a pine cone and quit hearing tinnitus. So all of that really great doctor advice on Google, unfortunately, there are companies that look very legitimate that take advantage of people who are hearing this sound and feel pretty desperate. And there are thousands of terrible products marketed at curing tinnitus. So I always encourage patients to have their hearing evaluated, see an actual audiologist if they're hearing tinnitus, and don't spend any money online on vitamins or supplements or anything like that until you've been evaluated, definitely. But in most cases, there's no evidence to support that any vitamin would help ringing go away.
Okay. Well, what can make tinnitus worse?
For a lot of people, repeated noise exposure will make it worse. High stress level, dehydration. We're always very focused on sleep. So if people are hearing tinnitus, they may notice when they haven't slept well, it's a lot worse. And that's likely because the brain isn't as equipped to deal with the sound when it's sleep deprived. So a lot of our treatments, they focus on all of those areas, reducing stress, improving sleep, making sure patients are hydrated. And it doesn't seem like it's treating the ear, but when patients come in hearing tinnitus and then leave several months later hearing it a lot less often or not hearing it at all, I consider that pretty treated.
Absolutely. I would have never guessed that just being dehydrated would have helped make the tinnitus go away.
Yeah, absolutely. And some patients, they notice when they have a lot of caffeine or alcohol, they might have a trigger for them personally that makes it flare up, to say. I've had tinnitus since I was 18, and I definitely noticed that caffeine can bring it out. I tell the students, it's like it goes from a solo artist to the whole choir, but that doesn't happen for all patients.
Is there any type of cutting-edge technology that assists with tinnitus treatment?
There is. There are a lot of sound therapy devices that are available now, and our students in the clinic work with patients on this. It's not something that I recommend people do at home because there is evidence that specific sound therapy may cause the same changes in the brain that tinnitus causes. So we want to be really careful and really deliberate about how we use sound therapy. But there are several manufacturers making these devices, and often it's available through the same hearing aid that a person might need for a hearing loss. We can do both treatments at the same time.
So I've seen you use cell phones and apps with patients in the past. Is that something that's related to someone with a hearing device, or is that also something you might use for tinnitus?
That's a good question. We have two different reasons that we would recommend sound therapy to a person. One of them, and what I was just talking about where we're deliberately setting it up, is tinnitus retraining therapy, and that's delivering sound for extended periods of time, either while the patient's asleep or during the day, to help the brain habituate or basically get used to hearing the tinnitus so it quits looking at it. And the example I always use is that your eyes see your nose all day long. It's visible. But when was the last time you thought about that?
Just right now when you said that.
So tinnitus is the same thing. We don't have to cut off your ear. Your brain is hearing the tinnitus and looking at it. All we have to do is train the brain to not look there anymore, just like the nose. You quickly go back to not seeing it anymore. Now you're seeing it again because I brought it back up.
Right.
But you'll quickly go back to not seeing it. That's what our treatment is targeted to do. So I think that that gives people encouragement that our brain's already wired to do this kind of therapy. They just have never done this specifically to get rid of the tinnitus. So that's where they need our help.
I love that analogy. That makes a lot of sense.
So the apps that she mentioned, those aren't for retraining therapy. Those are more for masking. So sometimes patients will notice at different points in the day their tinnitus is so bad they just need to get away from it. And there are a lot of free apps that we recommend, and I have them linked on our website. Our favorite one right now is by a company called Resound. It's a hearing aid manufacturer, and it is free, which is great for us. And it provides all kinds of different sounds a patient can pick from and mix together to cover up the tinnitus. And they can play it at night when they go to sleep. They could play it through headphones or through their hearing aids directly. So there's a lot of options for that. And it's just to cover it up and get some temporary relief.
So if you were to use some kind of an aid like that to help cover up the sound, is that good or bad for the brain training yourself to get rid of the noise during the day when you don't have that assistive device?
I don't think that it's good or bad. It's just a tool in our toolkit. We're going to use masking for acute relief because I don't want people having to wait 90 days, 6 months, however long it takes for their brain to habituate. So we often use the masking as a short-term treatment and while the person's doing long-term habituation therapy.
Okay. Well, as an audiologist, what questions do you like to see your patients ask you about tinnitus?
I think the first question that I always encourage patients at least to talk about with their primary care physician is, do I have a hearing loss? Because if you have measurable hearing loss, for most patients, correcting the hearing loss is going to improve the tinnitus. And often I think because of just lack of resources or education, some physicians don't understand that there are treatments for tinnitus. So that's where audiologists are working now to help spread that message and share education about it so that physicians feel comfortable and have a resource to send their patients to, and not just say, I don't know of any cure, you have to live with it. Mm-hmm. Because often when I see a patient, that's where they're at. They've spoken to somebody about it, they were told there's no cure, they did some online research themselves and found me that way. So I think just starting by making sure you don't have a hearing loss and then seeking treatment from a qualified provider would be good steps to take.
And do you think it's a good idea for everyone to go in and get a baseline reading of their hearing? Because like for me, I don't really have significant hearing loss at this point, but now I've gone in and had regular evaluations done yearly for the last couple of years. So that's helped for the future. If I do have hearing loss, I have a baseline to see where I was. Do you recommend that to many people?
I absolutely recommend baseline hearing tests. The problem right now is that a lot of insurance companies don't pay for preventative hearing tests in the same way they pay for a preventative eye test or a dental cleaning or any other care that you might need. So that's hard. We have options for patients here anyway, and I would venture most clinics would do the same, where we have different rates if you aren't using your insurance, just to come in and have a baseline test done. And if you can't, often universities will offer free screenings, and so will some private clinics, just so that you know where you're at. And like you mentioned, in case things change in the future.
And can you actually see tinnitus in your screenings of hearing? Does it show up for you?
You can't from a hearing test, which is what makes it so challenging. There are tests specific to tinnitus that we run, and there is a pattern that we see. For instance, there are tests for pitch and loudness matching, and we know where to expect tinnitus. Mm-hmm. So we'll ask the patient, kind of like an eye test, is number 1 or number 2 closer to the sound you're hearing? And there's an expected range and region that they might put it. Same with volume. Mm-hmm. There's an expected volume. So we kind of get an idea if they've got typical tinnitus or if it's something medical or unusual going on.
That's really interesting. Are there any resources online that patients can use to assist with their treatment and relief of symptoms? You'd mentioned one already that you use on your website.
Yeah, our website for KU, for our clinic, has a lot of resources for patients. Some of the therapies that we encourage patients to do are biofeedback exercises, and they're gaining a lot of weight, I think, in the medical community for a variety of symptoms. But for tinnitus, doing a biofeedback exercise when you're hearing it helps the brain learn not to be bothered and not to have a stress response to that sound. Mm-hmm. So if you know about Pavlov and his dogs, mm-hmm. These dogs were conditioned to salivate and expect food when a bell rang, even when there was no food. So if you think about the tinnitus right now, for a lot of people, their brain is getting anxious and stressed when they hear tinnitus. But if we train the brain to think, no, when I hear the tinnitus, I'm getting a relaxed response from the body, then we don't have to do the exercise after a certain point. Mm-hmm. Just paying attention to the tinnitus makes the person feel relaxed, which is the opposite of what's happening to them before they come in.
Right.
So these are things that patients can get started on before they see us. And we have a good resource that walks you through one exercise called progressive muscle relaxation. And the app I mentioned from Resound, there's an instructional video on how to do it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's very cool. How many hours a day do you think that people need to do this exercise? Or is it just like do 10 minutes a day and it's going to help you?
It varies by patient, and it's not like waking up and doing your morning yoga. I encourage patients, whenever you're hearing your tinnitus and you can't go back to your normal activity, that's when you should spend 1 to 2 minutes doing the exercise.
Okay. That's not bad.
So for some patients, that could be 50 times in a day. Other patients that I see, they might do it twice, maybe just to go to sleep.
But I'm sure it decreases as more often that they do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as a person who hears tinnitus myself, some nights, especially with finals week right now, I've been relying on it a lot more to go to sleep. But I've done it for probably 2 years now, and it's gotten to the point where the minute I start the exercise and make a fist on one hand, I'm already asleep. Wow. So my body's been conditioned now that when I tell it we're about to do the exercise for sleep, we're asleep.
It's like a kid. I don't want to do the exercise. I'm just going to go to sleep then.
Right, exactly.
Well, Lauren, I know you already have your Doctor of Audiology, which is a clinical degree, but you're also a Doctor of Philosophy student in audiology at KU, which is a research degree. So are you currently doing any research in the area of tinnitus?
I am, and that's the reason that I returned to KU. I worked in a clinic for 4 years after graduation, seeing patients with tinnitus, and I was always interested in learning from the patients that we saw. They come in with similar characteristics, but some treatments would work with one patient and not with the other. And I feel like clinicians have a unique opportunity that we can help the research community learn from the people actually in the field suffering from the symptom. And there are just some things that we can't mimic in a laboratory or in a simulated study. So I became interested in research, wanting specifically to work with patients and do clinical research. And then I was recruited back to my alma mater here at KU to teach and work on the PhD at the same time. So right now I encourage students a lot, if you're interested in research, or you find that you're the clinician that's always wondering why a treatment worked or didn't work, or why a patient reacted a certain way, you're already a researcher, and you should consider a PhD just to get the skills you need to do systematic, good research.
And what can they do with a PhD that they couldn't do with an AUD?
So anybody with an AUD could work on a research team and work with a trained researcher to do a clinical study. And I think that's really important. However, we don't get the skills that we need in the clinical degree to be able to run statistics, to set up good study design. You learn a lot more about research design and protocol, patient subject safety. There's just a lot more that goes into setting up a good study. So that's why you need the PhD really to feel comfortable.
Are there any classes that you cannot teach with an AUD degree that you could teach with a PhD degree at all? Or maybe mentoring students or anything?
It depends on the program, but here we rely a lot on clinical faculty to teach clinically related courses. So for instance, I teach content in hearing aids, in tinnitus, and in business. But there are some basic science courses like anatomy and physiology or other classes that I might not be as suited to teach. Really what changes for me will be more on having time dedicated in the week to do research and have students work with me on projects more than I do as a clinician now.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the 3 classes that you're currently teaching. Can you maybe explain a little bit about what students learn in each? The tinnitus, obviously, we just talked a lot about, so you probably mentioned enough about that. But for example, the hearing aids class and the business one in particular, I think you've done some really neat things in.
Yeah, our business class was actually written up in a magazine. It's pretty unique here. Instead of me teaching business concepts, I don't have an MBA. I recruit a lot of experts in different topics to come and talk to the students each week about that specific topic. One of the larger portions of the class in the beginning is dedicated to physician marketing, which as an audiologist, as a clinician, this isn't something that's in regular curriculum. And most programs, you would never leave feeling comfortable talking about marketing your services. But we work with Bob Tyso, who has a company that helps audiologists market to physicians. And he generously donates his time and all his resources to help our students learn how to do this and do it well. And they leave the class actually making a marketing plan and presenting it to a physician group.
Wow. And I know you mentioned earlier how patients have to be careful of the resources that they're finding online. So it's good that you're probably talking about this in the business class with your students so that you can make them aware of, give these warning signs to patients, don't believe some of this that you're reading online.
You're absolutely right. Part of my motivation was that I have 10 students here now who I can teach how to market to physicians and share our information in a way that's beneficial to patients and the physician. So then when they go off to their respective work sites, that's one more person who's spreading a good message about the options for tinnitus.
Right.
We do the same thing in the hearing aids course, and I'm excited this summer we're going to be recording some videos on instructional processes for hearing aids. Because a lot of patients don't need to come in for a visit. They just need a little help, maybe changing a part. Maybe they need extra practice helping, put it on their ear. So the students are going to be recording all of those little instructional videos to share.
Videos, great.
That's right.
That's wonderful. Lauren, do you have any favorite podcasts, blogs, YouTube channels, or anything to which you subscribe?
I do. I personally really like Dr. Cliff, who has a YouTube channel. He's an audiologist out of Arizona, but he has really great instructional videos. He does product reviews, and they're well put together. So I always encourage patients and students to check out Dr. Cliff. One of my personal favorite podcasts is Song Salad, which is completely unrelated, but I recommend it because it's hilarious. So.
What is that?
They kind of go through like the Wikipedia definition of something and then turn it into a song. You know, on those drives from Kansas in Lawrence over to our school here at the Med Center in Kansas City, I've got 45 minutes to kill, and it's a good time to listen to podcasts. So
not necessarily try to think
not
about something
anything
related
deep.
to audiology.
No,
deep and
no.
Yes, exactly. Well, I know you received your bachelor's degree in psychology and communication sciences and disorders from the University of Missouri. And I know that you are currently a PhD student at the University of Kansas and received your doctorate of audiology at the University of Kansas. So in the United States, you've definitely hit two big universities. But there's a rivalry between these universities. So how well received was your Doctor of Audiology from friends, family, and colleagues at KU?
I would say for people that don't know how the Midwest is set up here, Kansas and Missouri, Kansas City basically splits the state line. Mm-hmm. So there are people who consider themselves Kansas Cityans that live in both states.
Right.
That being said, depending on which side you grew up, then your home state school would be the University of Missouri or the University of Kansas. Mm-hmm. So I started at the University of Missouri. They don't have an audiology program, so it was not a rivalry to me to leave and pick a top 10 school. Mm-hmm. So I looked around the region. The University of Kansas is really uniquely positioned because it's in two cities. So I knew that the medical center campus would be here in Kansas City, where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And I'd also have classes in Lawrence, which again is about 40 minutes away. But you really get both experiences of the college campus life in Lawrence and the city life in the health center here that other universities I toured wouldn't have either.
Right.
So the rivalry for me, I don't read into it at all, but I certainly get teased by some colleagues. I have a stack of Mizzou sticky notes that I like to use if I have to leave a note for particular faculty members. But other than that, I think obviously we keep it pretty tame.
Especially the KU basketball fans. Those ones are the ones that really pick on you, I'm sure.
Those are, yes, in particular. And I do have patients that come in head to toe dressed in Mizzou gear when they find out that's where I started my studies. So.
How fun.
Yep. But likewise, I have patients that have a red and a blue hearing aid because they're such big KU fans.
Aw.
So I'm happy to cheer on anybody.
It's like getting braces and you get to pick the colors.
That's
I didn't
right.
know you could do that with
That's
hearing
right.
aids.
You can.
How neat. Lauren, thank you for joining us today and sharing your knowledge on tinnitus and the PhD in audiology degree.
Thank you for having me, Angela. I would encourage anybody that's listening that is experiencing tinnitus to check out our website, and it's kuhealthpartners.org. It takes you to our clinical website that has a lot of great resources. And then if you're interested in the program, obviously looking out on the KU website for the intercampus program in communication science and disorders. That's a mouthful, but we'll link it on our page as well, or checking us out on social media. We try to put references and resources up everywhere that we can so patients can have them.
Great. Well, to our listeners, that was Dr. Lauren Mann, Clinical Assistant Professor in the Intercampus Program in Communicative Disorders at the University of Kansas. Thank you for listening, and rock chalk.